Welcome to the Simpleton Podcast with special guest Mary Smith. Welcome, Mary.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Mary was recruited by Laura as an extra moderating force for the podcast because we're going to get crazy today. All right. We'll start with the obvious question. Mary, have you ever met or been around vampires?
I don't believe in vampires, but they're there. How about that?
They say the greatest trick the devil ever did was to teach us he does not exist. All right. Well, I do have a little bit of vampire awareness knowledge for everyone. Then we're going to talk about why we should bring back child betrothal and dowries. We'll go into the censorship of the Simpleton Podcast. We'll introduce you to an interesting Catholic that is on the national scene. His name is Vance. And then we're going to talk about our main thing, the main thing why we're doing the podcast today, which is hard to summarize, but it has something to do with why your religious ideals are killing your spirituality. We also call it Exodus 90 versus Exodus 9000. All right, vampire knowledge. All right. So, Mary, on this podcast, we don't do like Gay Pride Month or, Awareness Month. We do vampire awareness all year round. Okay. All right. So, from our secret authority on vampires, we have learned that in the olden days, when you were suspected of being a vampire, you were buried with your face down. Can you guys guess why that is?
No. Because then if you tried to dig out of your grave, you would dig down. You'd dig down.
Genius.
Yes.
That is exactly right. They wanted the vampires to dig downwards and not dig out of their grave. All right. But we also came across that apparently there are ancient meaning a few hundred years old, Jesuit writings about vampires, and we're going to try to obtain these. So we have a source and a person working on this.
Great. I can't believe I haven't brought this to the podcast, but I think 5 or 6 months ago, I saw an article about finding some child grave sites in Eastern Europe that the kids were buried as vampires. Yeah, I gotta find that.
Can we? Okay, get more information on that. I think that's a need to know item.
Yeah. Sorry, right. Sorry, I withheld that info.
Yeah, we need more firm facts than that, not just memories. You know what I mean?
I'll get it. I'll find it.
All right, betrothals and dowries. Are they historical curiosities, or are they the next wave of American Catholicism?
Yeah, no, it offends my modern sensibilities, and it doesn't seem like the landscape that we're in. That's my first gut reaction to that.
Well, that's my old reaction. There's this great meme where the guy says she wanted to be treated like a princess, so I married her off to a Polish dude to create an alliance. I feel like when you read about dowries and betrothal, it seems so weird, historically, random, oh, they used to do that. Oh, that's weird. Right. And now that I'm a parent and I'm watching my kids grow up, and I'm thinking I'm really at 18 going to send them out of my house when they're at when at least the boys are at a hormonal peak and the girls that don't really know the world yet, and they're going to go to some faraway place and come back with a mate.
Yeah.
Does that sound rational?
I think it's interesting because I would never have thought, in my 20s, that I should sort of look at the, family of origin of my spouse and think about how that may or may not affect it will affect your marriage, and how your spouse relates and all that. And I think that's a very rational and unromantic thing to do, but I think it makes sense. And I think Ryan has this funny story from growing up where he was 10 or 11, and out of nowhere, his mom was like, "Ryan, never marry an Irish woman." And he was like, "What? Why?" And his dad was like, "Yes, that's right. And the idea was she won't know how to cook, and you will grow to resent her." And he was like, no, but I will love her, like he thought this was nuts as a kid, and now I think he enjoys some good food in our house. He's like, that is not crazy advice.
Not crazy.
I was going to say
the Irish are crazy, in fact.
My mom is Irish, but
tempered
she
or helped.
Well, but she cooks all Italian.
Yeah.
When she married my dad. So she learned to cook,
yeah,
but it was Italian food.
There you go.
I feel like we were raised with this attitude that, when you're young, you are all potential. And you really are compared to any other point in your life, And what is that term? Is it plastic or whatever, where you're able to be malleable and change and do all this stuff, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I think like when you're in college and stuff, you see people who maybe have some antisocial behavior or are a little bit depressed or whatever. And it doesn't actually hit you with the weight that it does when you meet a 40-year-old with that same problem, because it's like their whole life's before them. This could be a phase. They could wake out of it tomorrow, right? And in reality, people do. And also in reality, people don't, And it's just like when I asked my father-in-law for my wife's hand in marriage, I thought of that as like an interesting formality. I actually did think I needed to take it seriously because I was living a very voluntary poverty lifestyle at the time. And I thought, are you okay with your daughter doing this? Because if you're not, I'm okay backing off. But now I'm like, no, that kid needs to ask my permission because I don't want to live with him and his parents for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
And she's making my daughter, who I think is a very reasonable person, all my daughters, but I don't want them to make like 40, 50-year commitments because they met Don Juan. Like at their weakest moment in college, they met Don Juan, even if he's Catholic Don Juan.
It's interesting because maybe things that are a little bit like bad habits or they get amplified when you have crying toddlers and all that, and yeah, I think you just don't feel the weight of it yet.
I'm wondering though, I'm going to push back in this just because you guys keep saying college. And college is so weird. It's such a weird thing because it's like these 4 years that are so formative, or we at least conceive of them as so formative, but it's only 4 years. And I wonder if part of the attraction to like the idea of a betrothal is because you shouldn't be getting married at 22 when you're right out of college. Like college is not real life. And so, and I'm just throwing this on there as like throwing a log on the fire, if you will, that like is one of the things we're scared about is, or grasping at is like a child choosing a spouse. And look, I didn't even choose the world. I mean, I said child, like choosing a spouse coming out of this environment that seems to be what so many American kids go through, or versus like an 18 or 19-year-old that goes off to trade school and has a thriving, is there something that's like particularly unique about the college setting, or getting married at like 18, 19, is there other ways to temper that than just betrothing?
Well, I don't know about the 18, 19. Well, there's kind of like a whole spectrum here, right? Like betrothal of your child is the most extreme.
Right.
And yet I find parents joke about it because like, you'll just be like, hey, we get along with this other family. Our kids get along. Why don't we just set this up, right?
Your child seems hardy.
And then the next more watered down version would be like what you see in India and China, where it's like parents arrange these dates, and it's not absolutely forced, but it's like strongly encouraged that your parents going to help you pick this spouse out. And then the more watered down version would be just ask the dad's permission. And then the normal American version is, crazy.
Right.
But I don't know if at trade school or college is the distinction, but like a late 20, like if I had a kid who was 28 years old, had been around the block, I would kind of trust their judgment in marriage more, right? I also don't know that it's reasonable to expect everyone to be chaste until they're like 30, Like I think that that's part of what marriage is about. And if they're going to get married younger than 30, then we kind of do need some help. And one of the helps I think parents do is they just send their kid to a college that, they think has a better dating pool than another college. Like you don't send your kid to.
Well, something that's happening here, which I like, Mary and my kids are like too young. But like mom, this is not in Hyattsville. This is in a nearby community. But a couple moms noticed that their kids were like really bad at dating, that it was very stressful, it was very high stakes, and they were like not going on dates or just going on these weird dates. And so they set up like it's like a little
and I'll say not going on dates because they're like, well, I can't see myself marrying that person. Like I won't go on a first date with this person because I can't see myself marrying them. That was the excuse. I think that's important.
So they set up this like little dating club where they just like match people up, and I think you're supposed to go on multiple dates, and I think they match you up with more than one person at a time, so it's like not
exclusive.
Anyway, so I think that's a not even halfway step, but it's sort of a step in that direction.
Right. Yeah, that is a step. I do think like probably we need a few steps in this direction. We don't need to go back to child betrothal. But,
I'm sorry, I'm going to comment on another thing that's funny in modern dating culture. This isn't like necessarily a Catholic thing, and maybe it's better in Catholic circles, is like this idea that you need to like wait until it's very serious to meet somebody's family. Like, I think that's weird. To get like serious with a person without knowing like the most important people in their lives is like a bizarre idea, and that there wouldn't be some involvement,
Well, there's a lot of reasons for that. I mean, I once had a friend who was having a very bad day in college, and it was a female friend, and we were not dating. And I took her to a family function because she needed to get out.
Yeah.
Right? I got asked about that girl for 10 years. You know what I mean? It's like, I don't know why you're asking me about my friend who I...
But that's more like an annoyance thing or like whatever. If you would have had more girlfriends that they liked in between that time, they would have stopped asking about that girl. Did you not have any girlfriends that they liked in between?
Not that I brought around.
Yeah, but I think there's an idea that it's wrong to or something.
Well, you're marrying me, you're not marrying my family.
Yeah.
Like an attitude of that.
Yeah.
So...
Anyway, whatever.
And it's funny that we simultaneously, the young have the attitude of you're marrying me, not my family, but then they also have the attitude of I'm totally warped because of my parenting.
Right. Yeah, right. Yes.
It's like they kind of have contradictory ideas. The other thing that was funny was I've seen this in conservative Catholic circles where dating becomes... This is something I think you were describing a second ago. It becomes so serious that it's like nuclear war, where it's like you don't ever go on a date until you're like
red button.
Right. And then like that girl's girlfriends can't be friends with you or any other girl that goes on a date with that boy because like they went on one date.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know what I mean? He's like, yeah. And it's like, and when dating becomes that serious, it defeats dating.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So, all right. We're not trying to cure all dating. We're just trying to bring back betrothals. All right.
Some of us.
I think the modern American dowry is not actually a dowry. It's a college fund. It's like this way we're going to help this kid get this start on life, And I do see some parents help their kids with like a down payment on a house and things like that. And that does sound like a dowry in a sense, the old version of the dowry, I do kind of have this idea though that like more than ever, I need to think about helping my child get a good start in life, even like economically, and that's even important for marriage. Not to make them marriageable, like in the old idea, but more like, look, if you have some basic security, you're going to fight less in your marriage. You're going to have less stress in your marriage. The probability of good outcomes goes up, But then when I think of saving up that money and handing it over to a university, I get kind of like sad. I want that money to go to like start a business or buy a house or something. I don't really want to be saving up my whole life a dowry for my kids to like go to.
But what if that university has the best dining hall on the East Coast?
Well, more like, do they have the best spouses?
No, but dining hall. That's what you're paying for. It's a great dining hall. Like, don't you? I mean,
I think you're paying
that's why
for.
universities are so expensive
Universities are
because
so expensive
there's
because you're paying for the great dining hall, not the character of the students.
Well, I think there's two. I do agree with you. I love that point because when I went back to my undergrad, it had been Starbucksified.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like everything had been renovated. We used to have cinder block walls in the classrooms. We didn't anymore. And the cinder block walls had been there since the 60s and they were fine, you know? And it was there too because it's going to be a cheap education, you know? But then I think middle management at the universities have been the death of the university, you know? So anyway, yeah. Do I want to pay? Because I mean, you could save up over $100,000 and have it all just go out the door on an education. And then they could end up with like a something studies degree.
Mm-hmm.
That's rough. I mean, that's some pain.
You have to watch the movie The Other Guys. I recommend that movie.
So as a podcast, are we taking a stance that we are for bringing back the dowries?
I think I'm for combating the idea that people need to be self-made because first of all that's like anti-Christian, but also like for all of time I think like parents have, you know, tried to do well for the like next generation, and I think that's like it. When we lose focus of the next generation, I think it's like a very weird thing and not like natural to humanity. And I think that,
you know what I think is very important that even parents that don't have a lot of financial assets can do is to be a safety net. Like I kind of always knew that if I like risked this and tried this thing and it didn't work out, I could end up at least on my parents' couch and I would be fine.
So I was actually recently reading something about dowries, and actually, so it was a pre-Christian culture. It was Greek, and the dowry was expected to be returned to the woman if there was a divorce. So it wasn't like, and you know, I mean, and so as we were talking about this, I was like, oh, that's interesting. In some ways, that's, you know, we think of it, as like buying, or I'm paying for the marriage or the, you know, it becomes under the control of the male, the husband. But this was, in a sense, a way for the family of origin, essentially the father, to take care of his child, perhaps, if the marriage didn't work out.
I think that this is weird, though, that like when I read, I think there's I wonder if there's a big modern bias here. Like when I read history, I see betrothals and I think it's for commercial interests, political interests, or something like that, or to buy someone into a social class or something, right? And now that I'm a parent, I'm like, oh, there might have been other reasons for this. You know what I mean? So I just wonder if maybe the ancients were smarter than we thought they were.
And this is the thing that's interesting about history is the stuff that often makes it into history are like the negative things, right? Either the negative or super positive. So like because the wife had to take her husband to court and sue them for the return of the dowry, at an annulment, if we're talking Christianity or something, we're like, oh, it was all just money and commercial. But like the parents who loved their daughter and found a suitable spouse and sent her off with her little dowry, like those people don't make the record books. Those parents don't make the record books.
Well, Laura and I were talking just yesterday about like how many people in the Old Testament were just goody goodies and they never made it into the Bible.
Right. The people who kept the covenant. The people that kept the covenant didn't make the Bible. You didn't have to send prophets for them.
Or there was a prophet and he was just like, hey, be a good person.
Yeah.
And then he doesn't make the Bible, but Isaiah makes the Bible.
Right. Right.
And that's important because like part of it is the reason why we keep telling a story is because we haven't figured it out yet. So, all right. So we have now decided that you should betroth your children and give them dowries. Moving on.
I want 5 mules for.
That's exactly the joke my dad would make. And that's yeah. All right, censorship. All right, very sad things happened to the podcast. We have received a label on YouTube. We had our old friend Garrett years ago on the podcast. It was one of our very first, very successful interviews. His podcast now has a conversion therapy warning because Garrett has same-sex attraction and he thought there might be healing for that. And so now YouTube has warned people against us. And I wonder if that has resulted in a shadow ban. It was like he left open
the possibility for that. He's not even a proponent of it.
Right. He'd never prescribed it or anything. But it also, though, makes you wonder, though, oh, is that an interesting label they put at the bottom of his video? Or does that actually mean it doesn't come up in search results?
Yeah.
And similarly, the freedom of speech alternative to YouTube is Rumble. And our editor was on vacation in another country, and he couldn't get our video to do anything on Rumble because he couldn't get Rumble because Rumble is banned there. So we are now the edgy podcast. We've been trying to be this for a while. It's kind of sad that we've come, we weren't brave enough to be, doing this 10 years ago, I guess. But the cancel machine's now kind of just tired and broken. And therefore they can't come after us. And therefore we can't become uber famous. It's kind of sad.
A lost opportunity.
It makes me cry every night. Yeah.
All right. The next man to be politically crucified is J.D. Vance.
Is going to be.
He's going to be. Right now he's in the honeymoon period because at the time of this recording, Trump was shot a few days ago. And so no one's saying that much bad stuff about him at the moment. All right. And Trump has now chosen a vice presidential candidate named J.D. Vance. I will try to give a little summary of what we know about him in terms of Catholicism, and then I'll just open the floor up for Mary and Laura to say whatever or comment. So there's a great article that's, if you're inclined at all, I suggest it's a good read. It's in The Lamp, and it's by J.D. Vance, and it's about his conversion.
Wait, hold on. I'm sorry. Just very basically, J.D. Vance is most famous for writing Hillbilly Elegy, which is autobiographical, and then was made into a movie. I think that's what most people know, mm-hmm. And it's a pretty good movie. And then he went into politics.
That book came out 8 or 9 years ago, something like that.
Yeah, and it caused a stir.
And his life story just before this conversion appears to be coming from rural, if not poverty, but close to poverty, and then end up going to an elite Ivy League school, Yale, for grad school. He also served in the Marine Corps. So he kind of went from the poverty to the Marines to an undergrad at Ohio State to Yale. And then he has this hillbilly elegy.
His story kind of offends a materialistic worldview because he made it, and politically some people haven't liked him because of this. But yeah, right. Anyway,
to me, the most offensive part that he's done is he has defended the dignity of kind of the ignorant commoner in a way, and not in his person, which maybe he is an example of that, but like in this conversion story he talks about his grandmother, who is not someone anyone would ever call educated, not someone anybody would idolize, but he idolizes her. And she has this religious intuition about her, even though she's not Catholic. And she's not like some plaster saint. She just knows right from wrong. And she watches the 700 Club, and she hates televangelists, but watches them anyway. But she still has this distinct religious insight that he likes, right? And then he ends up at Yale and ends up meeting kind of the East Coast Dominicans who have been friends of Simple House for many years. The province out on the East Coast is an excellent province of Dominicans. And he mentions them a few times in the article about conversations with them. And through them and St. Augustine's writings, he kind of comes around and converts to Catholicism. And an example of kind of the tone of this article is there's multiple places where he's excerpting St. Augustine, City of God, and things like that in multiple paragraphs. That's kind of the type of, and he's a great writer, which I've never read Hillbilly Elegy. I didn't even know it was a movie till you said that. But if he's half as good a speaker as he is a writer, he could be quite dynamic.
He is a good speaker.
He ends up converting, and then one other kind of special takeaway from this article was he says he was sitting in Washington, D.C., and saying that he didn't like the way Catholics treat the Pope, meaning Pope Francis at the time, that they treat him like a political figure and not like a pastor. And the Catholic he was with started trying to make a distinction about how he actually treats this, like is more analytical about Pope Francis. And he said, while they're having this conversation kind of alone, this like glass of wine jumps off the bar and shatters or falls on the ground between their feet. And then they both just walk out.
He says, I engage with Pope Francis more on an intellectual level or something like that. Like that's his, and then mic drop. And the guy
mic drop, right? And he doesn't say, hey, the devil interfered in our conversation, or hey, God threw a glass of wine on the floor. But it's just kind of like, oh, this might have been supernatural, and both the guys have to walk away.
Yeah.
But it's just kind of an interesting moment to put in there, you know? So before we kind of get into his actual politics, any thoughts?
No, let's get let's get into.
I have two thoughts, maybe. One is we have like three people who I've been talking to recently who kind of have a similar story to J.D. Vance. And like one's converting from Southern Baptist, is received into the church this August, you know. Another one was evangelical convert. And another one is a guy who literally was born in Kentucky like J.D. Vance and ends up, you know, going to good schools and becoming Catholic also. And the question is, I think right now I think for a decade now, it's been easier for Protestants to become Catholic than before. Like we're seen as much more like allied peoples than opposing forces. And that's a good thing, you know. I think also we've talked in this podcast about how the rift in America is kind of a rift against like asset owning and educated people versus kind of populist and labor people. And that the solution to a populist schism, we had kind of a thinker on the right and a thinker on the left say the same thing. The solution to a populist schism is an elite that loves the people. You know, it has to be someone who the elites aren't threatened by, who also has a heart for the common man. You know, and I don't know if J.D. Vance
can I also just interrupt and say,
go ahead.
I think, because this is actually a conversation I've had with my husband, and it's not just the people that they have to love, but like individual people too, because there's lots of people who are like, this economic policy is good for the masses, but don't want to actually talk to them. And just to tie that into your point about how much he still loves his grandmother, right? He didn't disavow her when he went to Yale Law School.
It felt like she was the only person he wanted to bring along with him into the Catholic Church. And I don't know that J.D. Vance can be that kind of like political fixer or savior or whatever you want to call that, because I do think he's viewed as too much a threat by the elites. I think he's not quite fitting the mold, you know. But also, one of the reasons why, when we actually get into let's just talk about politics right now, is the question comes, let's say J.D. Vance is absolutely fantastic. Like, I mean, when I read that article, I thought this is an excellent article, you know. Can he do anything? Like, is there any, you know, point to having him as a VP? Right. And my take is there's not going to be real change in a Trump administration. There could be some change, but not the type of major maintenance event or new direction we need, mostly because there's not enough legislative support. You know, the type of ideas these guys have are not being reflected in a bunch of congressmen. And without that bunch of congressmen and widespread support, they're not going to actually achieve major change. So then it's like, if that's the case, then probably the main benefit of having what we think of as a good guy and as VP, which I don't know JD personally, but let's just say we're in love with him for a second, is he's probably the front runner for the next presidency. Right? And that could be when things start shifting for real.
How much, as the vice president, will he influence is a question. But I read an article about him that was like, because he was very critical of Trump in 2016. That was like, you might think J.D. Vance is a sellout, but here's why he's interesting. And he according to the article, has been like very has been more collaborative and done bipartisan things, and I just think it is interesting if there is a person who's got their head on right that can communicate, between.
Well, will his rhetoric, I mean, to go back to your point about like, how do we solve the populist problem? Is he going to have a rhetoric that's just going to continue that divide,
I think I'm on a different page than both of you. I don't want peace. I don't care that they are arguing with each other and shouting at each other. I think the populists need real help, and I think they need a real fix. And so if we have peace and we get them to all behave and they aren't supporting weird agendas anymore, that to me is not a solution. So someone who could communicate better with the establishment, Washington, and say the right things and create peace is to me not progress in any way. Like I like it when people protest and hold up the debt ceiling because I think they're actually working for change. Yes, that divisive. Yeah, we need divisiveness if we want to change course. So the question to me is like, what is J.D. Vance and Trump? What is their real political outlook and what are they actually for? And I think they're both seem to be very pragmatic. And this seems to be the new thing coming out of the right is like, if you're idealistic, you're like for diversity. And then like when you get diversity and it's not working that well, you don't care because you're just for diversity, right? Or you're for free trade. And then, you kind of gut areas of the country. And then you're like, no, I'm still just really for free trade. Like you're not letting the reality correct you, right? And I think that the Trumps and the J.D. Vances of the world are like businessmen and they view the U.S. as a business and they're going to manage it as such, and they might posit a good, like a good that J.D. Vance would posit, it's like the family. And so I'm going to have policies that help the family, but he doesn't really know I don't even know what that would be, like another tax credit or something. I don't know, or just better jobs. I don't know, So I think they're kind of unidealistic politicians. They're much more like managers. And that gives you a lot of freedom in a way. But it also means I don't know where you're going, So I'm kind of curious how that all ends up. I think that's kind of the new wave we're seeing is not the libertarian type, not the like Catholic monarchist, not the socialist, not the diversity, equity, inclusion absolutist, but the like pragmatist type, Any other thoughts?
So what's the answer to that, right? Because you can be pragmatic about business and be totally immoral, or you can be pragmatic about business and like want it to work for good ends, right?
Well, pragmatic doesn't necessarily mean business. So
yeah.
And I think that that's what we're hoping for, right? Like if it's like, hey, I want to see my people flourish. And that means having healthy families, having good jobs, having not just a terrible consumeristic culture, right? Like, okay, right, let's work for that. It doesn't mean like just like one of the things that they're kind of coming out against is this new right is kind of anti where economic growth has come from. Like our economic growth being coming from Google and Meta and all these companies. And they're like, forget that. Let's break them up. They're monopolies. And it's like, oh, whoa, bud. That's like crossing the CIA there. But like, it's like, hold it, pump the brakes, but they're talking like that. They're talking like we're supposed to be breaking up monopolies and that'll be better for the American people. And so in a way, I don't know that this is the old pro-business people. This could look a little bit anti-business in a way.
Well, I think with the populist idea, but like, I think it's like a good manager is, or a good boss is like helping all their employees rise to the occasion and be the best and putting them in the right place.
It's also firing people.
Firing people. But that there is like a pragmatism to like a very human approach, like humans.
I don't know. I think this is a conversation you and I have been arguing about for a long time. And I was in your camp until about 2016. I don't think that, quote, the very human approach and the peaceful approach gets hardly anywhere for the church or for anything.
I'm fine with firing people. I'm trying to say that if you're trying to have a thriving company, you're not trying to screw your employees at every angle. And I think when you say he's going to be a pragmatic politician without ideals blinding him, it sounds like it's going to be like sort of anti-human or something. And I'm saying it could be pro.
Oh, I think pragmatist is kind of more human than idealist. And that's going to go into our second point.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, I guess I'm thinking like...
No, I know what I'm not trying to say, if everyone could just get along at the company or whatever. I think that the good manager and the good boss is like understanding his employees and trying to help them thrive. And if they're not doing their job, you fire them, and you're.
Well, like, I think Elon Musk is one of the best managers America's produced, and he bought Twitter and fired 80% of the staff.
Yeah.
Right. So I think when you have a sick organization, or like there's a guy who runs Netflix who I like what he said. He said, whenever they hire someone, they say that average performance will be met with a generous severance package. Like they plan to fire 60% of the people they hire, and they give them a lot of money when they fire them. But their point is they only want really good people on board, And these are all different management strategies. The funny thing is, though, is I have no idea why we think Trump's a good manager. Trump to me is like the Trojan horse, and he's most famous for firing people, and he fired people in his administration all the time. And I don't know that he's a good manager. Now,
no, he lost people left and right, good people in his administration.
I actually think he's a better manager than Biden, because I think we could take a case for American incompetency and make a very compelling case that we've just squandered all the leads we've had as a nation for, at least 10 years, but Trump's like the Trojan horse that gets the new like perspective in.
Yeah.
And maybe I don't know. It's also weird when someone like Vance is running, because like, as far as I can tell, he hasn't had a lot of time to do anything besides school and politics. So is he a manager? I don't know. So we'll see. All right. Why your ideals are ruining your spiritual life. All right, let's start with a discussion. We'll let Laura start this discussion, because this discussion we can come at from a lot of angles. But
okay.
Laura, can you explain your new program for the youth today?
Have I got something to sell you? I came up with this program. It has a very original name, Exodus 90K. Or it started as Exodus 9,000, but we made it Exodus 90,000. I know people that have really benefited from Exodus 90, but I think there's also obvious pitfalls in Exodus 90. And I was looking at, I know like a few young men that are maybe a little bit adrift, and maybe not ready to just enter fully into the life of the church and the Christian life. And I was sort of thinking like, well, what would I tell them to do? Like what would be a thing that could improve their lives, And I thought, well, wouldn't their life be better if they were like thinking about the 10 Commandments and following the 10 Commandments? And I thought, oh, okay, I would just tell them like, wake up every morning and read the 10 Commandments, And then I thought about it a little bit more, and then I thought, well, maybe they can wake up in the morning and read the Beatitudes, and then at night, they can read the 10 Commandments. And then they just do this every day for 9,000 days.
90,000 days.
Well, it started as 9,000, but you wanted to add another zero. So it went from a 24-year-long program to a 240-year-long program, at the end of which you may begin to understand the Beatitudes. The minimalistic Word of God approach to this is very much on purpose, and I think that the potential pitfall of an Exodus 90 is the sort of comforting yourself with like kicking butt and getting this done and being hardcore and all those things, and it's like a doing and not a receiving from God. And yeah. So there's my intro.
It's very much like a desert father kind of thing.
Yes. Yes.
And that's my take, is that the problem that we as a church have in the whole Western church, not just America, not just in DC, KC, but is that like we've kind of forgotten what the majority of spiritual life was in the ancient church. It was like being an environmentalist. It was like when you're an environmentalist, you don't go out and like create the environment. You like protect it and allow it to happen. Like that's what a formator's job is, not the creation of they're not like a cook. They're like a environmentalist.
Yeah, like I'm going to fill you with all the right theological arguments that you need to know. And here's like the recipe for how you will pray every day that will help you progress. And here's your formulaic spiritual director thing. And here's your, you're saying not that.
All of that serves an ideal. So if you have an ideal for the person or for the community, then you create steps to get there. Right. And I feel like in the early church, the idea was, we're just going to do really safe stuff. Safe stuff means sacraments, and we're going to read the Psalms as our prayer, which is this prayer straight from Scripture, so it's inerrant, no errors in there, and we'll probably have some silence and time with God, and then hopefully something will happen. We have no idea what, and that's early formation. And I don't think that type of formation resembles what we talk about when we talk about formation today.
So, by the way, like when I kind of thought of this idea, I was being a little bit of a jerk by calling it like Exodus 9000, but I told my husband about it and he was like, great, let's do it. And it's not like a dumbing down or a simple for the newcomer, like to actually like wrestle with the Beatitudes and the commandments every day is not like a, like it's appropriate for someone that's getting, entering the life of the church, but it's not like beginner necessarily. And I think that you can kind of flatter yourself with an Exodus 90 type of thing, that's like anti the thing you're trying to achieve.
We're picking on Exodus 90, but really this is in retreats now. It's in Catholic communities, whatever. And the idea is that there's people who want to be told what to do, which is not quite the right attitude. And there's people who love telling people what to do, which is not quite the right attitude, right? I think it's also like this problem of like, if you were to say, what comes first, your spirituality or your theology, and the right answer there is spirituality and theology serves it. It's kind of like saying a physicist saying what comes first, observations of reality or physics theory. It's like you start with observations of reality, then you develop some theories, then you test on reality. And if it doesn't jive, you go work on your theory more, And I think what we do with theology is because theology is about the spiritual realm, which is a harder place to test a theory on, admittedly, although your best source would be just Scripture itself, which is thousands of pages of observation that is inerrant, we kind of like lose this, right? Like where we actually start, like Scripture is more naughty than you want it to be. Like it's as if the Bible was written by Flannery O'Connor. Noah is a Flannery O'Connor character. David's a Flannery O'Connor character. Moses is a Flannery O'Connor character. I mean, even these weird prophets that it's hard to make heads or tails. Oh, like who's the guy who married Gomer? The prophet who was told to go marry a prostitute.
Zacchaeus in the New Testament, or,
Right. These are all kind of crazy stories, and that's what we were meant to know. That's the message God's been passing down through millennia for us. And yet what we want is a goody two-shoes spirituality.
I had a pushback a little bit just because I'm not even sure. So I'm going to try it out, and it's going back a little bit, but I think it has something to do with this thing about Scripture too, is that it's about your environment thing. Clark. Like when people are, I was starting to think of like parents who have an ideal for their children. And sometimes I think that's like fear motivated. But they're like, they have all these checklists of what they want things to look like because they're trying to create the environment in which their child can flourish in their spiritual life. So I'm wondering, like, if you want to flesh out your thing about like formation as just like you're like in the environment as like, what's the difference here?
I think I'm quoting Pope Benedict in Salt of the Earth when he said, like, how many types of spiritual lives are there? And he says as many as there are people.
Yeah.
Right? So if you're going to form your child's spiritual life, you almost have to start off with a question of what is a good spiritual life, right? And what you need to be more open to is your child might have a very interesting spiritual life that's different, you know? Now, I think that I'm kind of interested in this old Benedictine idea that it's like, hey, the monks here aren't going to tell you how to be holy, but will tell you when you're off track. You know, and that I think is kind of the way, right? Like Simple House training is kind of this via negativa training. It's like, hey, here's all your ideas of the poor that are wrong. Now, I'm not going to tell you who the poor are or what they are because it's hard to do that, but I can tell you those ideas are wrong. So now please meet the poor without using those ideas, right? Or here's some ideas of holiness that you might have in your head that aren't right. Get those out of your head. Now go take your scripture and go pray. I don't know where you're going to end up, right? And that's really the only way to get a St. Francis, right? St. Francis can't be imagined before he happens, right? And he's crazy. He's like naked with the bishop. He's just doing crazy stuff all the time. He's also perhaps, they sometimes call him the second Christ, just because how crazy he is, right? But that's not what we want. So the thing that I'm trying to highlight here is we're giving into a spiritual temptation when we want formation to be more than, say, like environmentalism. I'm using that analogy over and over again. But like when we want formation to be more, what we're giving into is the same thing that created kosher in Judaism. So the Old Testament has all these rules, and what kosher is rules on top of rules. And the idea there was like, if you love God, you won't break those rules. If you really love God, you won't get close to breaking those rules. So you'll create a hedge around each rule, which is its own new rule. Yeah. And if you can perfect that, then if you really love God, you'll create a hedge around the hedge. And you end up with something that is very much an OCD activity. It's also the activity that killed Christ.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's also that when Christ walks in the room, you're like, that's contradicting this enormous mental palace I have, and he's crushing my mental palace. I would rather kill him than give up my own constructs, my own ideals, right? And I think that Catholics, more than any other Christianity, can do this. And we can, and it's really not natural. Like when you go read the catechism or any major church teaching, the main frustration people have with it is it's not particular enough.
Yeah.
It doesn't spell out exactly what you should do. That's their critique of it, even though it's like enormous, you know, it's like, why didn't they tell me more? That desire for them to tell you more is I don't want to call it a sin, but it's like
it's a temptation, but
right.
It's a bad impulse. Right. Yeah. You were set to be free. You were set to cohabitate with the Holy Spirit and live an amazing Christian life of freedom. And when you want the rule book, you're desiring to lose your freedom.
Yeah.
And the way Catholics do it, unlike the Jews, is Jews build hedges. We get into intentionality. We get OCD about our intentionality, and then you lose your Christian freedom, and it's like just not what Paul was working for. It's not what Jesus was dying for. It's not, and like it's also just like go look at. I mean, what I say should be obvious.
Like Jesus didn't come here to preach like obsessing over was this a venial or a mortal sin,
Right.
Or he would have told it to you very point blank.
Yeah.
And told you how, you know, but in fact, no, that's a construct we put on, and it's not wrong. It's just misleading. It's just not useful. And it's like,
I mean, it can be
Jesus
helpful. It's not always misleading, but
Yeah, I'm trying to redirection us, right? To the religion where the very first Mass, Jesus gives communion to Judas. In a rented room.
Yes.
That sucked.
Yeah.
And then everyone took their first Eucharistic experience and deserted him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then we start having church in sewers / graveyards. You know what I mean? And these are perhaps the greatest church services we've ever had. And we don't need to go back there, but we need to be very clear that our religion is a religion of complete freedom with God. And it's like love God and do whatever you want is actually the point. It's not some formation program that somebody cooked up that's going to teach you table manners and stuff like that. Like your formation is the service of the poor, is the silence, is the love, is the humility,
the scripture,
is the
conversation with God.
Life.
It's I remember one of my favorite, Our Lady of Perpetual Discernment. If you keep praying to Our Lady of Perpetual Discernment, you will never do the thing that you're being asked to do.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It makes you, Our Lady of Perpetual Discernment is the patron saint of losers.
Yeah.
I started following this guy on Twitter whose hashtag is Our Lady of Antifa.
Oh. Yeah.
It sounds like a real thing, but it's not. Right. So here's an idea. So I'm trying to figure out a family vacation for my family, and we are not going to do anything major. We're not going to go to Disney World. We're not going to even go to the beach. We're just going to end up at some state park probably, right? And my goal when I'm asked, like, well, why do we even want to do this? Why don't we just stay home? is I'm trying to get to a point where it's like I have nothing else to do except jigsaw puzzles with my kids.
And go out for ice cream or something. Yeah.
Right. Like that's what today's work is ice cream or a Monopoly game where I throttle them or something like this, right? And that's what a retreat is. A retreat's not a carefully managed thing to create an emotional arc for you. And it's not wrong to do an Ignatian retreat, but we've kind of taken this way too far. It needs to just be like a family vacation where you're with God and you just have nothing better than to do jigsaw puzzles with him.
Yep. Related, but next idea is kind of when you becoming idealistic about what your prayer life should be, what your parish should be like, what your Catholic community should be like, what your Catholic circle should be like. And there's a thing where it's you can get very theoretical about this, but not respond to the actual thing that's in front of you, or not letting the actual real thing, the parish that God gave you, inform your sort of theoretical ideal.
Let's try to steel man both those positions. So there's one attitude where the point of the parish is to be an ideal Catholic community. Right. And that would mean okay, I guess we should all be moral. And you kind of work on this project of probably we all want to have big families and we all want to, have a Catholic education. We all want to do this and this and this and this and this. And then everyone's working on the project of the ideal Catholic community. Right. The problem with that project, well, I'm not going to tell the problem yet. The other view of the parish is that's Christ's outpost on earth. Whoever's showing up there got there. And we need to go be with those people and love them greatly and love with them.
Yeah.
And there's no one unworthy to be there. They're all created in the image and likeness of God, and let's go, And are there better and worse ways to do it? Sure.
I looked up just because I was curious about what the catechism had to say about the parish. And I didn't do a deep dive because it was just the internet and it was probably 11 p.m. or something. But what it said is a parish is a stable place for where you can meet the Sunday obligation, where the people who live within the parish can meet the Sunday obligation. That was what they had to say. So stability, just since we were talking about monks and things earlier, that there is a stability to the place where you worship, where you meet Christ, right? That was all that gave for the definition of the parish.
Yeah, but I think it's if it's like a place where people are coming together, then that person that might annoy you or you don't think is like all the way on track or something is like a feature and not a bug.
Yeah.
Well,
and I think I guess that's also what stability means, right? Like it's the people who live within the parish go to that parish. And so you have to deal with them because you are also part of that parish. Mm.
That's great. I think what's weird about when the parish is it becomes the idyllic project, is that this is a hypothesis. I'm not going to say this with my full confidence, but I think when someone falls short of that like when they kind of like something happens in their life where they're no longer on track with the ideal, right? Could be divorce, could be alcoholism, could be mental illness, could be whatever, right? They almost aren't. The community that's working for that ideal views that as a problem, and they view it as the person who's doing it as a problem. And it's like they're somehow not contributing towards building towards this utopian ideal anymore, and they're kind of not a member.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it's like when you're like constantly like, is this meeting the ideal? Is this the ideal? Is this the ideal? Like it like kills it. Like it's like everything has to pass this test, and you kill it.
We're in a situation where we have a lot of really good Catholic families around that are, you could say, idyllic, and we also have some families that are coming out of the culture more, who maybe have less kids or no kids or one kid, and it's hard to figure out how to put them into the community, be it at the school or the parish, because it's like, who are you? Like, can you be this ideal that we're promoting?
Yeah.
And I will say I know that there are a lot of people, because, God gave us two, right? So there is this feeling like, like if you don't meet that ideal of these large Catholic families, what is your role here? So, it's like, people are like, why we're even questioning people. It's just, I just mean like, because we're using family size as an example here, right? Of how sometimes people feel like, well, do I fit into this? And then you have the flip side of people saying, do they fit in? And everyone is having this conversation of like, do they, like, what do we do? And like,
why do they only have two kids?
Why do they only have two kids? I feel so bad. I only have two kids. Do I have to tell everyone about XYZ, which is like no one's business? And that's like, did I just even mention the name of Jesus in this description here?
And in reality, what I'm seeing is we don't even talk about the newcomer family because we're so comfortable with the families we're comfortable with that we don't have to deal with them. You know what I mean? And we don't have to make way. We don't have to accept. We don't have to, make room, And I think that I think families, marriages, spiritual lives can all be said to have an infinite number of equilibriums. Like if your spouse has an addiction problem, it's going to be a different equilibrium in that marriage than in, quote, the ideal. Right. And sometimes there's nothing you can do about it, but you could be living your very best life, being the very best saint, and you'll never be the ideal. You've been excluded from ever reaching there. Right. For whatever reason, it could be economic, could be whatever. And I'm worried. Anyway, I think that all of this is like a bad side effect of starting with the ideal community or the ideal family or the ideal spiritual life. And if instead we start with more where the catechism and the Bible starts, which doesn't really posit that stuff, we have a lot more to do and a lot more freedom and a lot more, like I have a much bigger job when I go to church. I'm supposed to be loving on all these people. And I think what you said, Laura, was the right way to put it, was like you said, the weird person or the weird family or the weird outsider is the feature, not a bug.
Yeah.
So, all right. What else do you guys have on this topic? I'm remembering something Mary said before we started, which is that somehow the ideal becomes an idol.
Yeah. Yeah.
I love that those words even sound alike.
Yeah.
It's just interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't remember what I was talking to Ryan about. I was talking about someone we knew did something that surprised me, and I was like kind of turned off by it, and I was saying like and this this I think this person is like justifying this very elegantly in their mind, because they are intelligent. And then I thought, no, like self-justification is just like the human temptation, and Ryan and I left the conversation there. And then he came home, he was like, this is so weird. But I just, on one of the podcasts I was listening to, they were talking about how intelligent people can fool themselves more easily.
Oh my gosh.
And I just, like, if you're a certain type of intelligent dreamer, like, use your gifts, but maybe there's a special temptation for you there.
Well, I also think sometimes you have, when we're dealing with like ideas, and the ideal is like we start living in our heads, right? And so this is like an intelligent, well-read person can maybe fool themselves because they just think their way into something, and then all of a sudden, it's whatever is in their head.
But then like the real...
rather than seeing the reality and responding to the reality of the material created world around us.
And
we're like physicists who've lost touch with testing our theories.
Yeah. But then it's just like real people and messy, difficult community life just become an affront and not the thing that you're supposed to be.
Yeah,
that you've been given, like the gift that you've been given,
Kind of like your family. Like I'm talking now family of origin, not the family you're creating, but it's like your family is just not going to be perfect. You know what I mean? But it's but it's also your blessing.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe there's a few people out there that doesn't quite be right too, but like I keep working with kids who've been abused and neglected, and their love for their mother is irrationally high.
Yes.
And I find it kind of interesting and edifying. And then you meet people who are given so much who are like divorcing their parent.
Yeah. This was a controversial claim that I made at at one of our book clubs or intellectual developments. I said I think that there's few people that you would meet in like the Simple House ministry who would say that their mother didn't love them. And I think that's true. And we've seen just horrible, unbelievable neglect, Yeah. And I think they would still think.
Well, we have a woman who we work with out here in KC who was left in a dumpster by her mother.
Yeah.
And she takes care of her mother.
Yeah. Jeez. Wow.
In her mother's old age.
Yeah.
Wow. And anyway, all right. That was not really the direction I'm worried that people will miss our point because we got too crazy with that. But
a friend of mine who's like a daughter of a psychologist says her mom always thinks, she's coming like from a Catholic perspective. And it's like, well, if the family wasn't broken, how would you get to Christ?
Well, especially out there in Hyattsville, I'd like to wish you guys safety from the undead.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Simpleton Podcast. Please send us feedback. Like, subscribe, share. It's the most popular podcast in eternity. Thank you, Mary. You are our first 3-time guest.
Oh, wow.
All right. See you later.
See ya.
Take care.